In a world torn by war, few names carry the weight of destiny quite like Thrall. His story is one of pain, courage, and redemption, the rise of an orc who would challenge everything his kind had become. Born into slavery, raised by his enemies, and yet destined to lead his people toward freedom, Thrall's journey is a legend carved in both blood and hope. We shall follow his path from the cruel walls of Durnhold Keep to the burning sands of Kalimdor, from the whispers of the elements to the roar of battle. It's a tale of honor rediscovered, of a warrior who refused to be broken, a leader who carried the burden of his people, and a shaman who sought balance between rage and peace. This is the entire story of Thrall, from slave to warchief, a saga of power, loss, and legacy. If you enjoy uncovering the stories behind Warcraft's most iconic heroes, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and prepare yourself. Because we're about to begin the story of one of the greatest leaders the Horde has ever known. Thrall was born into a time of despair. The Orcish clans, once proud and free beneath the wide skies of Draenor, had been shattered and enslaved after the First War. The Horde's brutal invasion of Azeroth had ended in ruin, and the survivors were now hunted, imprisoned, or scattered. In this chaos, two orcs, Durotar, the noble chieftain of the Frostwolf clan, and his mate Draker, sought to keep their newborn son safe. They named him Goal, a name that carried the promise of strength and hope. But hope was a fragile thing in those days. Durotar and Draker had defied Gul'dan and his demonic pact, choosing exile over corruption. Their courage made them targets, and betrayal soon followed. Ambushed by assassins sent to silence them, the Frostwolf leaders were slain, leaving their infant son alone in the snow, defenseless, crying, and unaware that fate had chosen him for something far greater than vengeance. The child was discovered by humans, soldiers under the command of Aedelus Blackmore, a ruthless officer of the Alliance. To him, the green-skinned infant was not a creature of innocence, but a curiosity, a tool to be molded and used. Blackmore took the child to Durnhold Keep, claiming him as his property. He gave the orc a name, Thrall, an old human word meaning slave. It was meant to be an insult, a reminder of his place in chains. Yet in time that name would become a symbol of freedom. Blackmore was cruel, but cunning. He saw potential in his captive, a creature of power that could one day serve his ambitions. He ordered Thrall to be trained as both a warrior and a thinker. The young orc was taught to fight in the arena, to endure pain, to obey commands without hesitation. But unlike other slaves, he was also educated, taught the common tongue, strategy, and the history of human wars. Blackmore envisioned a day when Thrall would lead an army of orcs loyal only to him, a puppet warchief who could bring glory to his master's name. Life in Durnhold was harsh and lonely. Thrall's childhood was defined by bruises and blood, by the laughter of guards and the crack of whips. Yet even as he endured cruelty, there were moments of light. Taretha Foxton, the daughter of one of Blackmore's officers, showed him kindness. She treated him not as a beast, but as a friend. She secretly taught him compassion, helping him read and write, and offering him glimpses of a world beyond chains. Her friendship became his anchor, a quiet reminder that not all humans were cruel. As Thrall grew, so too did his strength and his awareness. He began to question the stories he was told. Were the orcs truly mindless monsters? Why did he feel a pull towards something deeper, something ancient in his blood? The whispers of his ancestry stirred within him, memories of a people who once communed with the earth and the spirits, long before corruption had darkened their souls. Blackmore, blind to the fire he was nurturing, continued to push Thrall harder. He wanted a weapon, but what he was forging was a leader, a being who learned from the discipline of his enemies, yet yearned for the freedom of his kin. Every scar on Thrall's back became a lesson in endurance. Every humiliation became fuel for the strength that would one day shake empires. In those years of captivity, Thrall's destiny quietly took shape. He learned the ways of the humans, their tactics, their words, their weaknesses, but beneath it all the heart of an orc beat strong and proud, waiting for the moment it would be unleashed. And so, within the cold stone walls of Durnhold, under the watchful eyes of his captors, the legend of Thrall began. A slave raised in chains, a warrior born of defiance, and one day, a leader who would carry the spirit of his fallen parents and the hopes of a shattered people. Life in Durnhold Keep was a relentless cycle of pain and obedience. Thrall's every waking moment was shaped by the whims of Aedelas Blackmore, the man who claimed ownership over his very existence. To the soldiers and nobles who visited the keep, Thrall was a spectacle. A beast trained for their amusement, an orc made to bow, bleed, and fight on command. But beneath the hardened exterior of a gladiator, something greater was stirring. Blackmore's ambitions for his prized slave grew with every victory in the arena. He envisioned himself as a conqueror, ruling over a reborn horde with Thrall as his obedient figurehead. To reach that goal, he honed Thrall's strength and mind alike. His trainers taught the orc to wield blades and maces, to anticipate the movements of his foes, to endure pain until pain itself lost meaning. Every fight in the pit was a test, not only of his body, but of his will to survive. Yet Thrall was not broken. Even when the chains cut deep into his wrists, he refused to surrender his spirit. He learned to hide his defiance behind a mask of obedience. Outwardly, he bowed to his master. Inwardly, he observed, listened, and learned. The discipline he was forced to master would one day serve him far better than Blackmore could imagine. Through all the cruelty, one person kept Thrall from losing himself entirely: Taretha Foxton. She had known him since childhood, sneaking into the kennels to bring him food, books, and words of kindness. As they grew older, her compassion became a quiet rebellion of its own. She reminded him that he was more than what the humans said he was, that he had worth, that he was capable of something greater. Their friendship was dangerous, forbidden. If Blackmore had known the depth of their connection, he would have destroyed them both, but Taretha risked everything to keep Thrall's hope alive. Through her, he learned of the world beyond Durnhold, the stories of the orcs, the wars, and the camps where his kin were kept like animals. She showed him that there were others like him, imprisoned and lost, their spirits crushed under human rule. Each revelation cut deeper than any whip. Thrall had always felt different, too restless to remain a pet, too thoughtful to be a weapon. Now he understood why. The blood of warriors and leaders flowed through his veins. His parents, Durotar and Draka, had died defying tyranny. Their courage lived on in him, calling him towards something more than survival. At night, when the keep was silent, Thrall would sit in his cell and stare through the bars, feeling the weight of the stars above him. He wondered if his ancestors could see him, if the spirits of the Frostwolf clan still watched over their lost son. The pull of that unseen legacy grew stronger with each passing day. Blackmore, meanwhile, grew increasingly obsessed. He began to see Thrall as both his greatest creation and his greatest threat. He lavished his slave with brutal lessons, often testing him to the brink of death in the arena. Thrall's victories brought the crowd to cheers, but they also deepened Blackmore's jealousy. He wanted Thrall's loyalty, yet what he was nurturing instead was rebellion. The more Thrall learned of the orc's past, the less he could stomach his chains. Taretha's smuggled letters and whispered words painted a picture of a proud people before the corruption of the Burning Legion. He read about the Shamans, the bond with nature, the unity of the clans. For the first time, Thrall saw his kind not as monsters, but as a culture with dignity and purpose, a legacy worth reclaiming. The spark of defiance ignited fully when Blackmore forced Thrall into a fight he could not win. Pitted against multiple armed gladiators for the amusement of nobles, Thrall was beaten within an inch of his life. But as he lay bleeding on the sand, something ancient stirred within him, a voice that whispered of strength, freedom, and destiny. It wasn't rage that filled him, but resolve. He rose again, fought back, and defied the odds, his roar echoing through the keep like a promise. That day the humans saw him as a monster unleashed, but to Thrall it was the first glimpse of who he truly was. Not a slave, not a weapon, but an orc with purpose. In the days that followed, he could no longer quiet the storm inside him. Every command from Blackmore grated against his pride. Every beating only strengthened his will to escape. The lessons of combat, the knowledge of strategy, even the language of his captors, all the tools his master had given him would now serve his freedom. The time for submission was ending. The time for destiny was drawing near. In the shadows of Durnhold Keep, the slave began to dream, not of mercy but of liberation. The walls of Durnhold Keep had caged Thrall his entire life, but they could not imprison his will forever. Every scar, every cruel order, every whisper of defiance whispered by Taretha had carved one truth into his heart. He was not meant to live and die as a slave. The fire inside him had grown beyond control, and at last he was ready to act. One night, under a moon veiled in clouds, Taretha came to him one final time. Her eyes were filled with both fear and determination. She carried with her the tools Thrall would need: a key, stolen documents, and a map. She had risked everything to give him this chance. Her trembling voice told him of the Frostwolf clan, of a place in the mountains where his people might still live free. "Find them," she said, "and never come back here." It was both a farewell and a prayer. Thrall's heart ached as he looked at her. She was his only friend, the only human who had ever seen the person behind the chains. He wanted to thank her, to promise her safety, but there was no time. The guards would soon notice her absence. He clasped her hand, whispered his gratitude, and disappeared into the cold night. The escape was chaos. Thrall moved like a shadow through the corridors of Durnhold, every step echoing with memories of his years of torment. He stole a horse from the stables, donned a discarded suit of armor, and rode into the wild. Arrows followed him, torches flared behind him, and the alarm bells sounded through the night. Blackmoor's shouts thundered from the walls, promising torture and death if he were caught. But Thrall did not look back. For the first time, the wind on his face was his own. Days turned into weeks as he wandered across the frozen lands of Lordaeron, surviving on instinct and willpower. He had no tribe, no allies, only a vague map and a burning need to discover who he truly was. He hunted where he could, slept beneath trees and in caves, and followed the faint stories Taretha had told him. The wilderness was harsh, but it was also liberating. Every sunrise reminded him that he was finally free, and yet he still felt incomplete. Freedom without purpose was only another kind of prison. It was during one of these lonely nights that Thrall encountered his first orcs. They were not the proud warriors he had imagined, but gaunt survivors, remnants of the old Horde who had escaped the internment camps. He approached them with hope, only to be met with suspicion. To them, he was a stranger who spoke like a human and wore their enemy's armor. They saw not a brother, but a threat. Before he could explain himself, they vanished into the trees, leaving him alone once more. Then came the day he met Grommash Hellscream, the first orc who would look upon him not as an outcast, but as kin. Grom was a legend even among his own people, the fierce and unrelenting chieftain of the Warsong clan. Thrall found him in the wilderness, leading a small band of warriors who refused to bow to human captivity. When the two met, there was tension, the young orc raised by humans facing the battle-scarred veteran of the old wars. Grom's eyes burned with suspicion at first, but as he listened to Thrall speak, that suspicion gave way to something else: curiosity. He saw in this young stranger the fire of the old orcs, the strength of someone who had suffered, but not broken. And when Thrall spoke the names of his parents, Durotar and Draka, Grom's expression hardened with recognition. He knew those names. They were names of honor. That night, under the flickering light of a campfire, Thrall heard stories of his people for the first time, not from books, but from an orc who had lived them. Grom told him of the First and Second Wars, of the demonic blood that had enslaved their race, of the shame that followed when the Horde fell. His voice carried both pride and regret. And as Thrall listened, he understood the orcs were not monsters by nature, but victims of corruption and circumstance. Their destiny had been stolen, and he could feel, deep within, that his role was to help reclaim it. Grom tested him the next day in combat, as was the orcish way. The clash of their weapons echoed through the forest, raw and powerful. Thrall fought fiercely, his human-taught precision meeting Grom's primal ferocity. When at last Grom disarmed him, he grinned and extended his hand instead of finishing the fight. "You fight like an orc," he said. It was the highest praise he could give. For Thrall, that moment was more than victory. It was belonging. He had finally found a connection to his heritage, a glimpse of what it meant to be orc. Though their time together was brief, Grom left him with a purpose. "Find your people, Thrall. The Frostwolves still live. They will show you who you truly are." As Grom and his warriors vanished into the horizon, Thrall stood beneath the open sky, feeling the call of destiny stronger than ever. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time he walked it not as a slave or a fugitive, but as an orc seeking the spirit of his people. The journey had only just begun. The trail to the Frostwolf clan led Thrall deep into the frozen reaches of the Alterac Mountains, a land of biting winds and blinding snow where few dared to travel. Each step tested his strength, but the thought of finding his kin kept him moving. The name of his parents, Durotar and Draka, whispered in his mind like a compass guiding him through the storm. Somewhere in these mountains, he believed, their legacy still lived. Days passed before he found signs of life, faint tracks in the snow, remnants of campfires, and totems carved from bone and stone. They were crude to the untrained eye, but to Thrall, they felt sacred, alive. When he touched one, he felt something stir in the air around him, a hum of energy, wild and ancient. It was unlike anything he had ever felt in the human world. It was the heartbeat of the earth itself. He followed that feeling until he reached a secluded valley surrounded by jagged peaks. There, hidden from the world, he found them, the Frostwolf clan. The sight stole his breath. Orcs moved with purpose, tending fires and sharpening weapons, their faces marked by age, wisdom, and scars. These were not the broken captives of the internment camps. They were proud, living close to the land, free. When the Frostwolves first saw him, they reacted with caution. An orc dressed in scraps of human armor was not a welcome sight. Warriors encircled him, weapons drawn, suspicion in their eyes. But before violence could erupt, an elder's voice cut through the tension. An aged orc, blind but powerful in presence, stepped forward. His name was Drekthar, Shaman of the Frostwolf clan, and once the spiritual advisor to Durotar himself. Drekthar studied Thrall not with eyes, but with spirit. "I can feel it," he said, his voice deep as thunder over stone. "You carry his blood. You are Durotar's son." The warriors lowered their weapons, murmuring among themselves. The orphan of their fallen chieftain had returned. For the first time, Thrall felt the warmth of true belonging. The Frostwolves welcomed him as family, giving him food, shelter, and the stories of his lineage. Around their campfires, he listened to tales of Durotar and Draka, of their honor, their courage, and their refusal to bow to corruption. Thrall's heart swelled with pride. The image of his parents, once just shadows in his memory, now felt alive and close. But what captivated him most was Drekthar's connection to the world around him. The old shaman spoke to the wind, called upon fire, and listened to the murmurs of the stones beneath his feet. He explained that before the Legion's corruption, the orcs had walked in harmony with the elements, guided by balance rather than bloodlust. "We were once the children of the earth and sky," Drekthar told him, "not the slaves of demons or men." Under Drekthar's tutelage, Thrall began to learn the path of the shaman. His training was not one of strength or combat, but of patience, humility, and understanding. The elements, Drekthar said, could not be commanded. They had to be respected. They lent their power to those who sought balance, not domination. At first, Thrall struggled. He was a warrior forged in cages, taught to control, to fight, to conquer. But as he meditated among the peaks and listened to the voice of his teacher, something began to change. He felt the whisper of the wind brush against his mind like an old friend. The fire's warmth became more than heat. It was life, passion, and will. The earth beneath his feet pulsed with strength and stability, while the flowing streams spoke of adaptability and patience. The day Thrall first called upon the elements was one he would never forget. In the heart of a storm, Drekthar instructed him to reach out, to feel the rhythm of nature rather than resist it. Lightning split the sky, wind roared through the valley, and for a moment he thought he would be swept away. But then he stopped fighting. He listened, and the storm listened back. A bolt of lightning struck the ground near him, not as a weapon but as a greeting. In that instant he felt the unity of all things, fury and peace intertwined. "You have heard them," Drekthar said with pride. "You walk the path of the shaman." From that day forward, Thrall was no longer just a fugitive seeking his identity. He was a student of the old ways, a bridge between what the orcs had been and what they could become again. He learned that leadership was not about domination, but about guidance, not control, but connection. The Frostwolves taught him humility, and the elements taught him balance. The more he grew in spirit, the more he understood the burden his father had carried, and the destiny that now rested on his shoulders. The orcs were scattered, enslaved, and leaderless, but within Thrall burned the fire of their redemption. As winter began to thaw and spring crept into the mountains, Thrall looked down from the cliffs of Alterac, the wind howling around him like a song of freedom. He knew the time was coming when he would have to leave this sanctuary. The Frostwolves had given him his heritage and his strength, but his purpose lay beyond the mountains. The Horde was broken, and only by uniting it again could his people find peace. The slave had become a shaman. Soon the shaman would become a leader. The months that followed transformed Thrall completely. No longer the frightened slave who once trembled under Blackmoor's command, he had become something new. A warrior tempered by wisdom, guided by the spirits, and bound to a destiny that stretched far beyond the snow-covered peaks of Alterac. Under Drekthar's guidance, he mastered the ways of the shaman, learning to balance power with restraint, strength with mercy. The Frostwolf clan had given him not only a home, but a purpose, and now he was ready to act. Though life in the mountains was peaceful, Thrall could not ignore the suffering of the orcs beyond. The stories he heard from wandering scouts weighed heavily on him. Clans still trapped in internment camps, orcs living as broken shells of their former selves, their spirits crushed by years of imprisonment. Each tale ignited a fire inside him. The Horde had once been twisted into a weapon of corruption, but that was not their true nature. They were a people of honor, and someone had to remind them of that. Thrall gathered the Frostwolves in council. Drekthar spoke first, warning of the dangers that lay beyond the valley, human armies, patrols, and the ever-present threat of capture. Yet even the old shaman could see the determination in Thrall's eyes. "You have your father's courage," he said, "and his burden. If the orcs are to be free again, it will begin with you." And so, with the Frostwolves at his side, Thrall descended from the mountains to begin his mission of liberation. The first raids were swift and precise, strikes on internment camps to free their imprisoned kin. Many of those orcs were weak, their spirits dulled by years of captivity. But when Thrall spoke to them, his words carried the weight of destiny. He told them of the Frostwolves, of the old ways, of honor and the spirits. For the first time in years, they saw hope flicker again. His ability to lead came naturally, though he never ruled through fear or domination. Thrall led by example, fighting beside his warriors, sharing their hardships, and listening to their doubts. He treated every orc he freed not as a soldier to command, but as a brother to uplift. That humility drew others to him. The Frostwolf banners multiplied as new clans joined his cause, each one adding its strength to the growing force that would soon be known once again as the Horde. It was during one of these liberation campaigns that fate brought Thrall and Grommash Hellscream together once more. The Warsong chieftain had remained a symbol of defiance, refusing to live in cages or bow to human rule. When Thrall found him, Grom was locked in a fierce battle against an alliance patrol. His warriors outnumbered but unyielding. Without hesitation, Thrall and his Frostwolves charged into the fray. The two orcs fought side by side, fire and thunder united, until the last human fell. When the dust settled, Grom turned to him, a grin breaking across his scarred face. "I knew you'd find your way, little wolf," he said. "You've got your father's eyes and his spirit." Their reunion marked the beginning of a new age. Together they spoke of what the Horde could become, not a force of conquest and bloodshed, but a people who could stand with pride once more. Grom, ever the fierce warrior, was inspired by Thrall's vision of honor restored. And Thrall, in turn, found strength in Grom's unshakable passion. With Grom's help, Thrall's campaign spread across the Eastern Kingdoms. Camp by camp, prison by prison, they broke the chains that had bound their kind. The orcs who joined them were not just freed from cages, they were reborn. The sound of war drums once again echoed across the land, but their rhythm was different now. It was not a call to conquest, but to unity. Thrall's leadership also drew attention from the humans, particularly those in positions of power, who feared the return of a strong horde. Rumors of the green shaman leading armies spread quickly, reaching even the ears of Aedelus Blackmore. Consumed by bitterness and pride, Blackmore vowed to recapture his former slave. But Thrall was no longer his creature. The man who had once wielded the whip would soon learn the true meaning of freedom. As Thrall's movement grew, so did his sense of responsibility. He carried not just the memory of his parents, but the legacy of every orc who had fallen to corruption or captivity. The elements guided him, whispering of a balance that must be restored between the Horde and the world, between war and peace. His dream was not merely to rebuild what once was, but to create something new. A Horde bound by honor, united in purpose, and free from the demons of its past. On one cold morning, standing atop a hill as the sun rose over the camps of his gathered people, Thrall watched the banners flutter in the wind, each one representing a clan once broken, now reborn. Grom approached, his axe slung across his back, and spoke with a grin. "You've done it, Warchief, the Horde lives again." The title hung in the air, unfamiliar yet fitting. Thrall did not claim it with pride, but with humility. "No," he said quietly. "The Horde lives because of all of us." But even as the fires of hope burned bright, Thrall knew the struggle was far from over. The Horde's rebirth had only begun, and the world beyond the horizon would soon test everything they stood for. Still, as the drums of the Frostwolves echoed across the plains, Thrall felt the spirits stir in approval. The orcs had found their leader, and their leader had found his purpose. The world beyond the mountains was changing, though chaos still reigned in its corners. The aftermath of the Second War had left scars upon the land, ruined villages, abandoned fortresses, and internment camps where the broken remnants of the Orcish race languished behind human walls. It was in these places that Thrall saw the true cost of his people's fall. The once mighty warriors of the Horde were now shadows of themselves, their eyes empty, their wills shattered. To the humans, these camps were symbols of victory. To Thrall, they were graves that still breathed. He could not look away. The spirits had guided him this far, and now they called him to finish what he had begun, to free his kin and reignite the spirit of the Horde, not one of conquest, but of unity. The Horde's name had been drenched in blood under the influence of demons, but Thrall believed it could mean something greater. The word itself was not evil, it was the corruption that had tainted it. He would rebuild it from the ashes, purified by purpose. With Grommash Hellscream and Drekthar by his side, Thrall began the campaign to liberate the internment camps scattered across the eastern kingdoms. Each assault was swift and precise, a mixture of shamanic fury and tactical brilliance. He used the elements to strike with precision, storms that blinded guards, quakes that shattered gates, and flames that burned through chains. His warriors moved like shadows, breaking through human defenses before reinforcements could arrive. The orcs they rescued were frail, their bodies weak from hunger and despair. At first, they could not believe what they saw. A free orc wielding the power of the elements, commanding not through cruelty but through respect. Many did not even remember what freedom felt like. Some were too broken to fight, too numb to hope. But Thrall refused to abandon them. He spoke to them as one of their own, not as a conqueror or a prophet, but as a brother who had known the same pain. "Rise," he told them, his voice carrying across the campfires of the newly freed. "You are not beasts. You are not slaves. You are the sons and daughters of warriors, the heirs of a proud people. The humans have caged your bodies, but not your spirit. The Horde is not dead, and it lives in each of you." Those words became a spark that spread from camp to camp. As the Horde grew, so too did its purpose. Each rescued clan added to the tapestry of Thrall's dream. The warsong, the Frostwolves, the Shattered Hand, and others long thought lost. They came together not under the banner of conquest, but under the promise of survival and brotherhood. Thrall's vision extended beyond mere rebellion. He wanted to give his people back their identity. The shamans he trained began to teach others about the old ways, helping them reconnect with the elements that had once guided Orcish society. For every sword raised, there was a prayer whispered to the earth. For every battle won, a reminder was given that their strength came from unity, not rage. But freedom came at a cost. The Alliance, alarmed by the resurgence of the orcs, began to mobilize. Patrols increased, and battles became more frequent. Thrall had no illusions. The world would not easily forget the Horde's past. To them, orcs were monsters, and he was their leader. He knew that if his people were to survive, they needed more than courage. They needed a new home. The spirits whispered to him in dreams. Their voices carried on wind and thunder. They spoke of a distant land across the sea, a place where his people could begin anew, far from the hatred of the old world. He did not yet know its name, but the call was clear. Kalimdor. Before he could answer that call, Thrall had to complete what he had started. One by one, the internment camps fell. With each victory, the Horde grew stronger, not as an army of vengeance, but as a community reborn. Even the humans who witnessed these liberations began to see something different in this new generation of orcs. There was power in them, yes, but also restraint, discipline, and a strange nobility that had long been buried. Blackmore, however, saw none of this. His pride burned hotter than ever. The slave he once owned had become the leader of an entire people, a legend whispered across kingdoms. To him, Thrall's freedom was a personal insult, a wound that refused to heal. He began gathering his own forces, plotting revenge, blinded by obsession. For Thrall, the war against the internment camps was never about vengeance. It was about awakening the heart of a people who had forgotten their own strength. When the last camp fell and the final gate was torn open, he stood among his warriors and felt the wind carry their roars across the land. It was not the sound of war. It was the sound of rebirth. The Horde was alive again. Not the Horde of Gul'dan, forged in blood and felfire, but a new Horde, one built on the foundation of brotherhood, honor, and survival. Under Thrall's leadership, the orcs had found their purpose once more. Yet even as the fires of victory burned bright, Thrall's gaze turned westward. The elements whispered of storms on the horizon, of a destiny that would lead him far beyond the lands he knew. His journey, and that of his people, was far from over. The Horde had risen, but the world would soon test the strength of what they had become. Victory had given the Horde its life back, but peace was fleeting. The world beyond their camps stirred with unease, as if the earth itself knew that something greater was coming. Thrall often felt it in his meditations, an unfamiliar tension in the air, the rumble of distant storms that seemed to carry whispers. The elements spoke in fragmented warnings, restless and anxious. And then one night those whispers took form. As Thrall sat before a fire, seeking guidance, a figure emerged from the shadows. Draped in robes of grey and white, the stranger's presence seemed to bend the air around him. His eyes glowed with ancient power, and though his face was human, there was something otherworldly about him, timeless, unsettling, yet oddly familiar. "I am the Prophet," the figure said, his voice calm but resonant, like wind echoing through a canyon. "I have come to warn you, Warchief of the Orcs. A great darkness is coming. The same evil that once corrupted your people now threatens all of Azeroth." Thrall listened in silence. He had faced betrayal, war, and enslavement, yet the weight in the Prophet's tone sent a chill through him. The stranger continued, speaking of a force beyond comprehension. An ancient enemy whose shadow would soon fall upon every race, every kingdom. If the orcs remained where they were, they would perish with the rest of the eastern kingdoms. "You must lead your people west," the prophet urged. "Across the great sea lies Kalimdor, a land unspoiled, untouched. There you will find what you seek, your destiny and the salvation of your kind." Before Thrall could question further, the prophet vanished, leaving behind only a faint ripple in the air, as if he had been made of smoke and light. Thrall sat in stunned silence, the words echoing in his mind. Could this truly be the will of the spirits? The elements, once so restless, now felt calm, as though they too acknowledged the truth in the stranger's message. When Thrall brought this vision to his advisors, reactions were mixed. Some, like Drekthar, saw the hand of fate guiding their warchief. Others were skeptical. Why trust a mysterious human sorcerer when so much of their suffering had come at the hands of humans? But Grom Hellscream, ever the warrior who listened more to instinct than fear, spoke what many felt in their hearts. "We've spent too long chained to this cursed land," he said. "If there's a chance for freedom, for a real future, I say we take it." And so, The decision was made. The Horde would leave the eastern kingdoms behind. Preparing such an exodus was no small feat. The orcs scavenged ships from the coasts, repaired old vessels, and built new ones with whatever materials they could find. The process took weeks, perhaps months, time filled with uncertainty and urgency. The humans, watching from afar, could not understand what drove the orcs to the sea. To them, it seemed madness. To Thrall, it was faith. When the day came to depart, the shores were alive with motion. Warriors, shamans, and families boarded the crude ships, the salty wind stinging their faces. Thrall stood at the bow of the lead vessel, the banner of the Horde fluttering behind him. For the first time, they were not fleeing in defeat. They were sailing toward destiny. But the great sea was unforgiving. As they pushed into the open waters, storms rose to meet them. Towering waves battered their ships, and the wind howled like an angry spirit. Many vessels were lost, swallowed by the ocean. Thrall called upon the elements for aid, but even they seemed to struggle against the fury that surrounded them. The sea was testing him, testing whether his conviction could endure the unknown. Days turned into nights of chaos. Food ran scarce, morale faltered, and whispers of doubt spread among the weary travelers. Had they followed a madman? Had the prophet deceived them all? But in their darkest moments, Thrall's voice rose above the storm. He reminded them of who they were, not slaves, not fugitives, but survivors. His faith, steady as the mountain, reignited theirs. One night, when the tempest was at its worst, Thrall stood upon the deck, lightning flashing around him, rain pelting his face. He lifted his hammer to the sky and called out to the elements, not in anger, but in unity. "I do not command you," he shouted. "I ask only that you guide us, as brothers, as guardians of this world." The storm raged for one final hour, and then, as if hearing his plea, it began to calm. The sea grew quiet, the clouds parted, and the first light of dawn broke through. On the horizon, through the mist, the orcs saw land, and vast, wild, and untouched, Kalimdor. The orcs wept, cheered, and prayed. They had crossed the great sea, leaving behind the world of their torment to begin anew. For Thrall, standing at the edge of this unknown continent, the air felt different, alive, pulsing with the energy of an untamed land. The elements here were strong, vibrant, welcoming. It was as if the very earth recognized his purpose. The prophet's words had been true, but this was only the beginning. Ahead lay a continent filled with new dangers, unknown peoples, and a destiny that would test the very soul of the Horde. Thrall gripped his hammer and looked inland. "We've made it," he said quietly to his people. "Now we build a future worthy of our ancestors and of our freedom." The journey across the sea had ended, but the journey toward destiny had only just begun. The shores of Kalimdor were unlike anything Thrall had ever seen. The air was thick with the scent of untamed wilderness, and the ground pulsed with life. The spirits here spoke in voices strong and clear, not the weary whispers of a world scarred by war, but the vibrant song of balance. To the orcs, this land felt like a promise, a chance to begin again. But promises often come with trials. No sooner had the Horde set foot on this new continent than the harsh realities of survival returned. They were strangers in a wild, uncharted realm. The forests were dense, the beasts fierce, and resources scarce. Yet the orcs endured, driven by the vision Thrall carried within him. He led his people inland, building makeshift camps, forging weapons, and learning to coexist with the land rather than conquer it. But Kalimdor was not empty. The Horde's arrival did not go unnoticed. Human survivors from Lordaeron, led by Lady Jaina Proudmoore, had also crossed the sea, following their own mysterious guidance. And elsewhere, hidden in the depths of the ancient forests, watched the Night Elves, guardians of the wild, fierce protectors of their sacred lands. To them, these newcomers were intruders, defilers. Tensions flared quickly. Skirmishes broke out between orc scouting parties and human survivors, each misunderstanding feeding the flames of hostility. The old hatred of the Alliance and the Horde was hard to kill. To the humans, orcs were still the monsters of old, the ones who had burned their homes and cities. To the orcs, humans were the chains that had bound them for generations. Thrall, however, refused to let history dictate their fate. He remembered the Prophet's warning, a coming darkness that would consume all if they did not stand together. This land was meant to be a new beginning, not another battlefield. But even as he sought peace, the burden of leadership weighed heavily on him. Every decision carried the lives of thousands, and every battle risked undoing all they had built. The orcs moved cautiously across the plains and forests, searching for a place to settle permanently. Along the way, Thrall began to sense that the same power that had guided him here was guiding others as well. The world itself seemed to be pushing different peoples together, forcing alliances that none of them fully understood yet. It was during one such conflict that fate intervened. A violent battle erupted between orc and human forces near the coast, each side certain the other was the aggressor. But as the fighting raged, a voice of power split the air, a familiar one. The prophet appeared once more, his presence commanding silence across the battlefield. "Enough," he thundered. "The time for petty conflict is over. You fight each other while doom approaches. The Burning Legion has returned to this world, and none of you will survive unless you stand together." The words froze every heart. The Burning Legion, the same demonic force that had enslaved the orcs and nearly destroyed Azeroth, the same evil that had corrupted their ancestors. The prophet's warning had not been symbolic, it was literal. The darkness he spoke of was already here. The humans, weary from their journey and distrustful of the orcs, hesitated. But Jaina Proudmoore, leader of the survivors, stepped forward. Her eyes met Thrall's, not with hatred, but with the weary recognition of someone who had seen too much loss. "If what he says is true," she said, her voice steady, "then our war means nothing. We cannot fight both the Legion and each other." Thrall nodded, seeing in her a courage that mirrored his own. He extended his hand, a gesture of peace between two peoples who had only ever known war. "Then we stand together," he said, "for the sake of this world." Thus began an uneasy alliance between orc and human, one born not of friendship, but of necessity. Jaina and Thrall worked side by side, exchanging knowledge and strategy. Jaina's wisdom and mastery of magic balanced Thrall's strength and connection to the elements. Together they began to understand that perhaps this was what the prophet had intended all along, not merely survival, but unity. Still, many on both sides resisted. Old wounds ran deep and trust was fragile. But as the Legion's presence grew clearer, its demonic minions corrupting forests, razing villages and spreading death, doubt slowly gave way to resolve. The Horde and the humans could not deny the truth. The real enemy was no longer each other. One evening, as the two leaders met around a campfire, the conversation turned to the future. Jaina looked out at the horizon, her expression somber. "Do you ever wonder if peace is possible, Thrall, or are we only delaying the inevitable?" Thrall considered her words carefully. "Peace is never certain," he said, "but neither is war. What matters is that we choose on every day to fight for something better." In that moment, an understanding passed between them, a bond of mutual respect that would shape the future of both their peoples. For Thrall, it was another lesson in leadership. Strength was not just in battle, it was in restraint, in empathy, in the courage to trust even when the world told you not to. As days passed, the alliance began to solidify. Orcs and humans fought side by side against demonic incursions, slowly pushing back the darkness. The prophet's vision was unfolding. The path to salvation lay not in isolation, but in unity. Yet Thrall knew this fragile peace could shatter at any moment. The true war had yet to begin, and the fate of all Azeroth would soon depend on whether these new allies could truly stand as one. The Horde had crossed oceans and endured storms to reach this place. Now, they would face something far greater, a war not for land or power, but for the very soul of the world. The forests of Kalimdor shivered under a darkness that had not been felt for generations. The Burning Legion, a force of unimaginable malice, marched across the land, leaving fire and corruption in its wake. Archimond, the Legion's champion, moved with unstoppable force, seeking to consume the World Tree and claim Azeroth for the Legion's master. It was a threat so immense that even the old hatreds between Orc, Human and Night Elf seemed insignificant. Survival demanded unity. Thrall, now seasoned by leadership and tempered by the lessons of the Frostwolves, understood the weight of the coming conflict. The prophet's warnings had been clear. The Orcs alone could not face this enemy, nor could humans or Night Elves. Only together could they hope to endure the storm. He traveled to meet with Jaina Proudmoore, the human mage who had earned his trust, and Malfurion's Stormrage, the night elf druid whose wisdom spanned centuries. Each of them brought a different strength to the table: magic, nature, strategy, and each brought a perspective that challenged Thrall to see beyond the battlefield and into the hearts of those he sought to lead. The three leaders convened at the base of Mount Hyjal, where the World Tree, Nordrassil, stood as the final bastion of life against the Legion. Arshimon's forces were vast, a seemingly endless tide of demons and corrupted creatures. The ground trembled beneath their advance, and fire rained from the sky. For the first time, Thrall felt the magnitude of the stakes in a way that was almost paralyzing. It was not just his people or the humans at risk. All life on Azeroth teetered on the edge of annihilation. Thrall organized the Horde into disciplined ranks, combining the strength of the warriors with the spiritual guidance of the Shamans. Grom Hellscream and his Warsong warriors fought at the front, embodying raw ferocity, while Frostwolf scouts and Shamans flanked the enemy, calling upon the elements to weaken their ranks. Thrall's role was not only as a fighter, but as a coordinator, a bridge between peoples who had long seen each other as enemies. The battle erupted with the force of storms colliding. Fire and fell magic tore the landscape apart. Jaina conjured walls of frost and arcane barriers, protecting the front lines and striking back at the relentless Legion. Malfurion, drawing upon the power of nature itself, summoned the forest to life, twisting roots to bind demons and calling ancient trents to crush their ranks. The Orcs, inspired by Thrall's presence and clarity of purpose, held their ground against odds that would have broken lesser forces. Yet even with unity, the cost was immediate and brutal. Warriors fell on all sides. Orcs, humans, and night elves alike shed blood beneath the shadow of Archimond. Thrall witnessed comrades he had guided from the internment camps now cut down in the prime of life. Every life lost pressed upon him, a reminder that leadership was not merely about victory, but about responsibility for those who followed him. The turning point came when Archimond advanced directly on the World Tree. Every spell, every strike of the axe, every elemental call seemed to pale before the demon's might. Thrall realized that brute force alone would not win the day. Sacrifice and strategy would be required. He coordinated with Jaina to create a diversion, drawing Archimond's attention, while Malfurion summoned the power of the World Tree to strike a critical blow. The plan required precision and absolute trust in each other's skills, and a willingness to risk everything. As the three executed the plan, Thrall himself confronted Archimond. He did not fight alone, but he became the focal point, channeling the power of the elements into a singular force of resistance. Lightning and wind surged around him, fire answered his call, and the earth beneath his feet roared in defiance. It was a display of raw, spiritual connection that merged his years of training, his experiences of slavery and freedom, and his understanding of leadership into action. The battle reached its climax when Archimond, weakened by the combined efforts of the Horde, humans, and night elves, was finally struck down. The World Tree survived, its life force intact, and the Legion's advance was halted. The price, however, was severe. Countless lives were lost, and Thrall felt the weight of each one as a shadow upon his soul. Leadership, he realized, was not a path of glory alone. It was a crucible of responsibility, demanding the ultimate sacrifices. Standing amidst the ruins of the battlefield, Thrall surveyed the aftermath. The Horde had fought not as a conqueror's army, but as a unified people defending life itself. Jaina and Malfurion stood beside him, weary but resolute, and for the first time Thrall understood the true meaning of his journey. Leadership was as much about inspiring hope as it was about wielding power. Mount Hyjal became more than a battleground. It was a turning point in Thrall's understanding of destiny. The Horde had survived, yes, but survival alone was not enough. Thrall now carried the vision of a people rebuilt, not through fear, but through honor, courage, and the bonds forged in adversity. The lessons of battle, sacrifice, and unity would guide him for years to come, shaping the Warchief he was destined to become. Even as the fires smoldered and the winds of Hyjal carried ash across the land, Thrall felt a clarity he had never known. The path forward was dangerous, uncertain, and fraught with challenges, but it was also filled with possibility. The Horde had been reborn in fire and shadow, and Thrall understood that destiny demanded more than leadership. It demanded wisdom, courage, and an unwavering commitment to the future of his people. The Battle of Mount Hyjal was won, but the war for Azeroth's soul had only just begun. And Thrall, now tempered by both triumph and loss, was ready to guide his people into the uncertain horizon. The victory at Mount Hyjal had earned the Horde a moment of respite, but Thrall knew the triumph was only temporary. The Orcs had survived the Legion's assault, yet they remained scattered, displaced, and weary from years of wandering and warfare. They needed more than victories. They needed a home, a land where they could rebuild their culture, honor their ancestors, and live free from the oppression of others. Thrall carried that burden as if it were carved into his very soul. The choice of location was crucial. Thrall and his advisors traveled across Kalimdor, studying the terrain, the climate, and the resources. The southern plains were harsh, filled with deserts, rocky outcrops, and unforgiving sun, but Thrall saw opportunity where others saw only desolation. This land could be claimed, shaped, and defended. It would bear the scars of their struggle, yet it could also become a symbol of endurance and strength. He named it Durotar in honor of his father Durotar, a reminder of the legacy the Orcs were destined to carry forward. Building a new city was no small feat. Orgrimmar rose from the desert like a declaration of survival and ambition. Stone by stone, wall by wall, the Orcs worked tirelessly, guided by Thrall's steady hand. Shamans and warriors collaborated with artisans and scouts to ensure that the city was not only defensible, but also a reflection of their culture. The streets echoed with the sounds of construction, the rhythms of drums, and the chants of those calling upon the spirits to bless the land. Yet even as Orgrimmar took shape, Thrall understood that leadership was more than building walls or erecting towers. His people were strong and proud, but they were also restless. Many carried the scars of slavery and displacement, their spirits demanding both freedom and purpose. Some questioned his decisions, impatient with diplomacy or the slow pace of reconstruction. Others wanted to test their strength against anyone who might challenge them, forgetting the lessons of the Legion. Thrall had to guide them with both firmness and understanding. He convened councils where the leaders of each clan could speak, ensuring that every voice was heard. He mediated disputes over land, resources, and honor, often walking a fine line between authority and compromise. Each decision he made rippled across the Horde, shaping its culture and values in ways that would endure for generations. Diplomacy was a new battlefield for Thrall. He negotiated with humans, night elves, and other races of Kalimdor, seeking to maintain peace without compromising the Horde's sovereignty. Each interaction tested his patience, his understanding of balance, and his ability to foresee consequences. He learned that true leadership often meant listening more than speaking, observing more than commanding, and sometimes sacrificing immediate gain for long-term stability. Even in times of calm, Thrall remained vigilant. Raiders, wandering bands of outcasts, and remnants of human forces threatened the fledgling city. Scouts reported occasional skirmishes and mysterious fires at the outskirts. The weight of responsibility pressed upon him like never before. Every attack, every complaint, every setback reminded him that being Warchief was more than holding power. It was holding the hopes and lives of an entire people. Despite the challenges, moments of triumph reinforced his resolve. Orgrimmar became a symbol of unity. Clans who had once been fragmented now shared streets, marketplaces, and ceremonial grounds. The Frostwolves maintained their traditions. The Warsong's ferocity was tempered by discipline, and Thrall encouraged cultural exchange between clans to strengthen bonds. Slowly, the Horde began to understand that their strength was not just in arms, but in trust, honor, and shared destiny. Thrall also cultivated alliances, particularly with those who had stood with him during the Battle of Mount Hyjal. Jaina Proudmoore remained a trusted advisor and mediator, helping maintain dialogue with human settlements. Malfurion Stormrage's council ensured the Horde respected the land and its ancient spirits, preventing the mistakes of past invaders. Together, these relationships reminded Thrall that leadership required collaboration and humility, even when wielding great authority. Yet the role of Warchief was never free from isolation. Thrall often walked alone through the city he had built, feeling the weight of every decision, every life dependent on his guidance. Nights were filled with meditation and reflection, seeking counsel from the spirits and the echoes of his ancestors. He questioned himself constantly. Was he doing enough? Could he keep the Horde united? Could he ensure that their new home would not become another battlefield? Through it all, Thrall understood a simple truth. Leadership was a balance between strength and compassion, vision and pragmatism. Orgrimmar and Durotar were more than cities or territories. They were testaments to resilience, proof that a people could endure without surrendering their honor. Every stone in the walls, every flag raised in the wind, and every clan that pledged loyalty to the Horde was a reflection of the values he had fought to restore. As the sun set over the crimson sands of Durotar, casting long shadows across the city he had helped shape, Thrall knew the work was far from complete. Peace was fragile, and the road ahead was uncertain. But for the first time, he allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. The Warchief had built a home worthy of his people, a place where the spirit of the orcs could thrive. Yet even in that pride, Thrall felt the whisper of destiny, a reminder that his journey and that of the Horde was far from finished. Challenges lay ahead as they always would, and the measure of a true leader was not just in victories, but in the vigilance and courage to face the trials still to come. Years passed in Durotar, and Thrall's role as Warchief evolved from that of a warrior leader to a mentor and guide. Orgrimmar had grown from a fledgling city into a bustling stronghold of the Horde, but Thrall understood that his greatest legacy would not be the walls or towers he built. It would be the people he nurtured, the next generation of leaders who would shape the Horde long after his time. Among those he guided, Garrosh Hellscream was perhaps the most ambitious and volatile. The son of Grommash Hellscream, Garrosh carried the same fierce pride and raw strength as his father, yet he lacked Thrall's patience and spiritual insight. Thrall recognized both potential and peril in the young orc. He sought to temper Garrosh's impulsive tendencies, teaching him the values of honor, unity, and responsibility. Strength without wisdom is destruction, Thrall often reminded him, hoping the lesson would take root before it could fester into recklessness. Thrall's own connection to the elements deepened with time. Meditation, ritual, and communion with the natural world allowed him to sense the land, the winds, the fires, and the waters in ways few could comprehend. He learned to anticipate storms, detect disturbances in the earth, and even feel the pulse of distant events carried on the currents of the elements. This spiritual bond guided many of his decisions, helping him balance diplomacy, warfare, and governance. Yet even as Thrall's wisdom grew, so too did the complexities of leadership. Not all clans shared the same vision. Some orcs grew restless, frustrated by rules, traditions, or the restraint that Thrall demanded. They longed for the glory and ferocity of old, seeking conquest rather than unity. Others struggled with loyalty, influenced by whispers of old grudges, personal ambition, or the lure of power. Thrall mediated disputes, wielded authority, and attempted to guide the Horde toward cooperation. But he knew that leadership was never absolute. The path of harmony was fragile, and the seeds of discord could germinate quietly, unseen, until it was too late. Garrosh's impatience became a particular concern. He admired Thrall's strength, but chafed under his caution. He desired glory and action, often advocating for aggressive campaigns or harsh punishment of perceived enemies. Thrall counseled restraint, warning that unchecked aggression could undo the delicate balance he had worked so hard to maintain. "The Horde is more than the strength of its arms," Thrall said during one council. "It is the honor of its people. Without honor, even victory is defeat." Garrosh's silence that day masked neither defiance nor agreement. It was the quiet storm of ambition waiting to erupt. As the Warchief, Thrall also faced challenges from external forces. Neighboring races, old enemies, and even distant allies tested the Horde's resolve. He navigated negotiations with humans and night elves, balancing diplomacy with vigilance. Treaties were fragile, alliances tenuous, and each decision carried repercussions far beyond the city walls. The eyes of the world were on the Horde, and Thrall felt the weight of every expectation, every success, and every misstep, shaping not just the present, but the future of the orcs themselves. Amid these trials, Thrall never abandoned his spiritual path. He continued his communion with the elements, seeking guidance and insight for the complex decisions of governance. Storms became teachers, rivers whispered counsel, and fire offered lessons in both destruction and renewal. Through these practices, Thrall found clarity, even as the human and orcish political landscapes became more tangled and fraught. Yet the more he saw, the more he understood that leadership was as much about foresight as it was about action, and foresight could not prevent all mistakes. In his quieter moments, Thrall reflected on the legacy of the Horde. He remembered the Frost Wolves, Grom Hellscream, and every soul freed from the internment camps. He understood the cost of slavery, war, and exile, and he resolved to safeguard the Horde from the repetition of those tragedies. But leadership, he realized, could not control every impulse, every ambition. He had nurtured Garrosh with the hope that wisdom would temper strength, yet even the best intentions could be misunderstood, twisted, or ignored. The Warchief's teachings extended to every corner of Durotar. Elders, shamans, and warriors all looked to him for guidance, not simply as a commander, but as a moral compass. He sought to instill the principles that had guided his life: honor, balance, unity, and respect for both the elements and the people. The young orcs learned discipline through example, observing that true strength was demonstrated not only in battle, but in restraint, foresight, and empathy. Still, beneath Thrall's calm and measured exterior, he sensed the undercurrents of tension growing. The Horde's success and stability depended upon cooperation and shared values, yet the ambitions of certain leaders, particularly Garrosh, hinted at challenges yet to come. Thrall understood that even the most harmonious societies could fracture under pressure, and he resolved to prepare to teach and to guide as long as he could. In these later years, Thrall's journey became both inward and outward. He was a statesman, a warrior, a shaman, and a mentor. Every decision, every lesson, and every spiritual communion shaped not only the present, but the destiny of generations to come. And though the seeds of conflict had begun to stir quietly beneath the surface, Thrall remained steadfast in his belief that the Horde could endure. If its leaders remembered the lessons of the past, the bonds forged in hardship, and the sacred duty to honor both their ancestors and their people. Even as shadows of discord whispered in the distance, Thrall's vision remained clear: a Horde united by strength, guided by wisdom, and tempered by the elements. Yet he knew that this path was not guaranteed. The very lessons he imparted could be twisted, the ambition he nurtured could turn, and the future of the Horde would soon demand choices that tested every principle he held dear. As the years passed, Thrall's role in the Horde evolved once more, from Warchief to something closer to a guardian of the world itself. Though he had built Orgrimmar, united scattered clans, and led the Horde through battles that tested their very survival, Thrall's journey was never truly complete. His heart called him to a higher purpose, to heal the land and guide the forces of nature that had always been his allies. The Cataclysm arrived as a reminder that the world was fragile, and even the strongest civilizations were at the mercy of greater forces. The earth shook, volcanoes erupted, and oceans rose in fury, threatening every living being on Azeroth. Thrall, deeply attuned to the elements, felt their agony and their unrest. Mountains cracked under pressure, forests burned, and the rivers ran red with destruction. His people looked to him once more for guidance, but this was no ordinary battle. The enemy was not an army to be defeated, but the imbalance itself and the violent, uncontrollable fury of the world unleashed. Thrall journeyed across Kalimdor and beyond, rallying shamans, druids, and leaders to aid in the relief of suffering lands. With the Earthen Ring, he sought to mend the fractures in Azeroth's core, drawing upon his mastery of elemental forces to stabilize rivers, calm storms, and soothe the pain of the earth itself. Each act was a reminder that true leadership extended beyond politics and warfare. It demanded empathy, humility, and the willingness to face consequences far greater than any battlefield could contain. Even as he labored to restore balance, Thrall wrestled with challenges closer to home. Garrosh Hellscream, once his protege and now a figure consumed by pride and a thirst for dominance, began to shape the Horde in ways that threatened the values Thrall had fought so hard to restore. He saw the corruption growing within the Warchief's leadership, reckless decisions, cruelty in the name of strength, and the brewing conflicts that would soon divide the Horde. Thrall felt a painful mixture of responsibility, regret, and sorrow. He had nurtured Garrosh with hope, yet even the best intentions could falter. Despite the weight of these personal struggles, Thrall never abandoned hope. He reminded himself that the Horde was more than any one individual. It was a living testament to resilience, unity, and honor. He sought to guide his people indirectly, empowering those who could balance Garrosh's aggression with reason, while preparing to confront the corruption should it grow beyond containment. Leadership, he knew, was as much about shaping values and vision as it was about commanding armies. Thrall's spiritual journey continued to deepen. Time spent communing with the elements revealed truths beyond mortal understanding. He discovered that the earth, wind, fire, and water were not simply tools to wield, but living, breathing forces that demanded respect and reciprocity. With every ritual and meditation, Thrall became more attuned, more capable of listening to the subtle voices of the world. He understood that power without wisdom was fleeting, and that stewardship required both sacrifice and insight. Through the trials of the Cataclysm, Thrall demonstrated that even a single leader could effect monumental change when guided by principles greater than personal ambition. Entire regions of Kalimdor were stabilized, lives were saved, and the Horde, though challenged by internal strife, endured. Yet Thrall also recognized that his journey was never about conquest or glory, it was about legacy. What he did now would ripple far beyond his own lifetime, shaping the Horde's culture, values, and destiny for generations to come. The culmination of his experiences, from a slave raised in chains to a young fugitive discovering his heritage, to Warchief and Shaman, defined Thrall as more than a warrior. He became a symbol of perseverance, a bridge between people and the elements, and a moral compass for a people who had often lost their way. He carried the lessons of the Frost Wolves, of battles fought, and of leadership learned through struggle into every decision. His hope was enduring because it was not naive. It was forged through hardship, tempered by wisdom, and tested by both human and orc alike. In the quiet moments after the storms were calmed and the fires of war had subsided, Thrall often stood alone, looking across the lands he had helped shape. He reflected on the journey from the child held captive in Durnhold Keep to the Warchief of a united Horde, to a Shaman working to heal Azeroth itself. He thought of friends lost, allies gained, and the countless orcs who had reclaimed their dignity through his guidance. Every hardship, every triumph, every decision had carried him to this point, a living testament to resilience and hope. Though challenges remained, Thrall's legacy was clear. The slave who had been raised in chains became a leader who shaped the destiny of a people, a mentor who inspired generations, and a shaman who bridged the gap between mortals and the elements themselves. He had faced betrayal, war, and natural catastrophe, yet he endured, and in enduring he became a legend. As the sun set over the rugged lands of Durotar, Thrall felt the wind against his face and the pulse of the earth beneath his feet. He closed his eyes and listened, not as a war chief commanding armies, but as a servant of the elements, a guide for the Horde, and a witness to the enduring spirit of his people. The story of Thrall was not just one of survival, leadership, or conquest. It was the story of a slave who became a legend, a symbol of hope for a people who had learned to rise again, and a reminder that even in the darkest times, perseverance, honor, and courage could shape the fate of the world.